Hey everyone, welcome back to the Growth Signal, where we are rethinking the way we build relationships with our customers. And I'm so excited to welcome my new friend, Dan. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alyssa. Happy to be here.
All right, let's get right into it. Dan, what is your hot take?
My number one hot take for customer success is that the overwhelming majority of mutual success plans are super vendor centric and a ton of effort for the customers with very little payoff for them and should be ditched. Not all, not categorically necessarily, but there are the overwhelming majority I look at and have seen are a ton of work for the customer with mostly vendor side payoff.
Yeah, it's like giving your customer homework, right? As the entire process. And I saw a tweet or a post or something recently on social media that said the reason your onboarding is failing is because your onboarding was for you, not for your customer. And I think that that's right in line with what you're saying here, right? Like we're creating these mutual success plans and it's really like give me everything and I'll give you nothing and this is you doing my work for me.
That's exactly right. I think that there's a way to do that, and I'm sure we'll get to that as the conversation goes on, like, how do you actually do a success plan in a way that is beneficial? But most of them are, like you said, it's, "I'm gonna ask you to intake all the info that I'm not gonna just that I should be discovering normally over time and putting together and using resources available to me to figure out. I'm gonna ask you to tell me all of the things so that I can check the box that I've done the mutual success plan."
Yeah, it's hard too because right, it was probably well-intentioned when it got started, right?
Oh,
Like,
absolutely.
have you ever seen a mutual success plan work?
I have seen not with that name. I know a few people who have some that have worked, and I'll probably get to some of them in this call. I haven't experienced firsthand because I haven't worked with them, but I know a couple people who swear by the ones that they have, and I trust their work enough to know that they mean with that they're spot on with theirs. Um, but in the places that I've been, usually they have something that accomplishes what a mutual success plan is, like, intended to do, but they don't call it that. It's usually something like our action plan or even just really good, like, detailed, "Here's what we're working towards, and here's our next steps to get there." More so than this big behemoth of a mutual success plan, which usually ends up being a really long document with lots of info that, like you said, ends up being homework for the customer. But the ones that I've seen that have been effective, whether they were called that or not, and from the people who I've talked to who've done it, well, number one, they're simple. Like they're not this comprehensive, captured everything document. That's number one. Number 2, I would say they really do put the emphasis on, like, what the success is for the customer. Like, what do they actually want? Because a lot of times I've seen mutual success plans that are really constrained by, like, what are the product signals we can get, like, out of this? What are the actions you can take in our product? And despite it being defined as a success plan, it really is hyper focused around the individual, like, product inputs, not the actual outputs that the customer wants to see in their business. So the best ones that I've seen that are successful, like, are much more consultative in nature and much more outcome focused and simple.
Yeah, I consulted with a company that was trying to do a integrated account plan or something like that. It was where it was supposed to be the single source of truth for sales and customer success and support and onboarding and the partners, and it just became this like thing that everybody hated. So then they tried to just rebrand it and say, well, it's not an account plan anymore. This is a strategic decision guide or something like that. Some stupid name that one of the consultant groups had come up with. So if it's not as simple as a rebrand, what can we actually put into these success plans to make them mutually beneficial, to live up to the name that we've all given them? And we talked about it being simple and the approach of being consultative, but how do we actually achieve that if you've never had to be consultative before?
Yeah, great question. I would say if you're starting with the idea that it needs to be mutual, you hit the nail on the head a second ago. It's not going to replace your CRM. And if you're trying to have it do that, even if you would never call it that, like to the point of the org you were just describing, they would never say it was trying to replace their CRM. But ultimately, they were having it be the one source of truth for this instead of the CRM. The mutual success plan, I think it starts with asking what on here is not mutual. If it does not benefit both sides, so to speak, it does not belong on the success plan, period. Like on the mutual success plan. It's okay to have a separate internal plan that you're working that does have some of that info. That's totally fine. But on this customer facing mutual success plan, think through like the words that we're labeling it with that we've tried to call it that for a reason. If it doesn't matter to the customer, if it doesn't resonate with what they're trying to accomplish, it shouldn't be on the mutual success plan. Period. Like I think that's one of the north stars. And secondly, like if it doesn't in any way connect to what is seemingly obvious to the customer your company would want to know about them, it also shouldn't be there. Like there might be other discovery things that you want to know for other opportunities. I don't know that the mutual success plan is going to be the best place to capture that because again, that's for you and not for the customer. Um, and then the second piece would be truly having like steps that are on both sides because again often a mutual success plan looks like homework that we're giving the customer and things they need to do, and I think that comes from the good place of like you said earlier that it comes from a healthy place of we know that any meaningful change is going to require the customer to have buy-in and take action on their end. So true. But that doesn't mean that a mutual success plan is me giving the customer a bunch of homework. So I should have steps on both sides in a mutual success plan.
I like the idea too of like you got to give someone some skin in the game, right? So if they're just like buying your service and all they've done is pay for it, but there's no plan of how they're going to emotionally implement this, how they're going to make sure that there's the change management in place, right? There's only so much you can do as the vendor to move that process forward. And you have to get your person on the inside who's going to help you move that forward. But your point about it's steps on both sides, but not homework on both sides. So how can I, as a leader who wants to be more strategic, how can I ensure that I'm doing as much of the legwork and making sure that it's mutually beneficial for both. If I don't necessarily know in this beginning of this relationship what is mutual and what I can glean from my own research and my own understanding, my own experience versus what I need the customer to help me flesh out.
I think part of that is you can't necessarily introduce it right away at the outset for that very reason. You discovery is table stakes. And if you need to do more of that discovery, go for it. Like have that conversation. Don't try to jump to this just because I feel that every account needs to have a mutual success plan. So I'm going to go straight to that without having done the legwork of building rapport, building relational credibility to understand what they really need, what goes on in their business, so that we can make meaningful recommendations on steps to get to what their goals are. So I guess that if I'm distilling that down, like don't jump to it too quick, right? You have to almost earn enough to know about their business to make an ask of them doing mutual steps and to make steps that are recommendations that are meaningful on both sides.
Let's go back to even before the mutual success plan comes into play. What is the first thing that you would do in a first meeting, right? We haven't earned the right to ask for mutual success plan conversations yet or the materials that go into that. But what is the first thing that you would do on the path towards getting to that mutual success plan and earning the right to ask?
Absolutely. So one of the big things I am a massive fan of, even if you have, and especially with, I would say, if you have a separate team that does implementation slash onboarding with your customers, that's not your CSM team, right? That falls maybe under the broader CSM umbrella. I think that the CSM teams, that is not an excuse to be hands off during that period. You already begin earning the trust and earning the right to speak to them simply by virtue of project managing the implementation. Like, even if there's another team that's doing the implementation, that's running that piece of it, that's maybe more technical, you're meeting with the people who are the champions or the EBs involved, keeping them apprised, letting them know of risks along the way, having the conversation that's not focused on the hands-on keys, whatever needs to go into your implementation. So you're helping them understand that. You're teeing up for how are you going to implement this in the change management side on your business? If this team is working with your team on the technical side of implementation to get this up and running, how can we have a conversation around what is that going to look like in the business for you on the other side? Because you're not looking to implement it for the sake of implementing it. You're obviously looking to have a change management component. So I think that that's one of the biggest key ways. Is I think it's we have rightly understood that implementation. Once you get to a certain threshold, right? You're not like a small startup. I understand that. Once you get to a certain threshold, implementation is a specific enough motion that you should have a dedicated team that does it. The miss is when you say that that means that a CSM doesn't come in until after implementation, I think, because you can begin building trust early.
What if what if I get into the situation and, there was this movie back in, like, the '90s of, "Hey, he's just not that into you." What if I get into that situation and my customer's just not that into me and I'm trying hard, I'm doing all of the right things, I'm following your advice, I'm planning for a mutual success plan, but they don't care enough about my product or my implementation, or the person who's been in charge of championing this implementation really doesn't care or has other priorities, right? There's how many 70 different SaaS products in their tech stack that they're trying to get going. What do I do if someone doesn't care about the success of this initiative?
Love that question because it gets to a reality that we don't often talk about in the CS and SaaS space, which is that not all of your customer commitment is equal, and not all products are equal in the strategic relevance. Like, if you're a more transactional product with your customers, own that and don't try to implement something just because it is said as a general best practice. If you're a more of a commodity product, right? For example, there's nothing wrong with that. You that's very meaningful still, but understand that and don't try to create plans that are different. Also, don't treat all of your customers the same or treat the risk the same. For example, if that is how a customer is acting and they are a low spend customer, I'm not going to give specific ARR numbers because low spend is different for every company.
Right.
But if they're a low
Relative.
spend customer and they're a little less interested in the invested in like a more concrete success plan, not that into you, like you're right in that example like you gave, maybe it's not a risk. Maybe it's just a reflection of, to your point, they have 70 and a low spend product for them. They're not going to invest the time in. That's okay. That's not necessarily a risk signal. If you have a customer that is spending a meaningful amount with you, and we have on my end, and in every company I've been a part of, I've told teams that a level of engagement or a lack thereof as the spend has gone up becomes a higher risk signal than when the spend is lower, because it becomes a red flag if somebody is spending that much and isn't invested in following up on the success of it. So again, without putting the specific numbers there, I would say look at the whole picture. Is this a lower spending customer for you and this is a commodity for them, transactional? That's okay. Don't make it something it's not. Are they a high spend customer and this is a red flag, and so therefore someone should be invested in this because they're spending a significant amount of money as a business on your product? Then explore, is this a who problem? Am I talking to the right person? Do I need to bring in a leader to help get some of that strategic buy-in on both sides? Is it because implementation is thought, whatever the risk might be, like find out, do the work on that, but understand what some of the source might be there, because you might just be talking to the wrong person, I think. Oftentimes, again, CS teams can be guilty of, and I say this as somebody who has been guilty of it. So myself would be just talking to whoever's willing to talk to us at a company and say, great, that's who we want to work with. That's the champion. That's the person to work with. When a champion is someone who's going to advocate for and try to push for the development of what your product's achieving, not just generally being there and just being available. So you really have to look at it through that multifaceted, holistic lens instead of just making a general determination. And I get that that's not like the super attractive answer to like just give like the hard fast, nope, here's how you fix it, because customer success is complex, right? Like there are multiple factors that go into these things. So don't treat a commodity spending customer like it's something that should be strategic on their end, and vice versa.
Yeah, and to that point, like we talked a little bit about the beginning, you have to earn the right to create these mutual success plans and have your customers contribute to that. How do you figure out though where you rank in their strategic priorities, right? Like what kinds of questions do you ask? Who do you ask them to? And at what point in that relationship can you start to uncover that?
Yeah. Most ideal world, before CS has ever gotten involved in it's in the pre-sales process and their understanding. And they've got a way to qualify. You've got different levels of spend with your customers. Companies know how much people spend with them on average, right? Like, so you can be able to look at and understand, is this a customer who's spending a strategic amount with us? Um, so number one, pre-sales, because that discovery is absolutely crucial to understanding what they want to do and how strategic that outcome is. And ideally, their spend is commensurate to the strategic outcome of what they're doing, and that you don't have a sales team that will chronically oversell, right? That's a whole other conversation that we could do a whole separate podcast about overselling. So that's number one, ideal, and that is seamlessly transferred to the customer success team. And I would say that I don't remember where, similar to you mentioned a tweet earlier that you saw. I don't remember who I saw share this, but they talked about the reason why a lot of times the pre-sales to post-sales handoff isn't done well is because there's not a lot that's actually meaningful to hand off in the process, and not the right things have been captured. So if there's info that can be beneficial and set up accelerating the customer, work with your sales team to incorporate getting that info early. And if not, then ASAP, figure that out, ask some of the questions. Some of the things you want to uncover, not necessarily by asking this question directly, but that you want to uncover what's at stake on their end if this fails, right? What's the benefit that they get if this succeeds, right? So those are some of the things you want to find out to understand how strategic is the skin in the game, right? To your point, you don't necessarily have to ask that way, but you want to get that info. Is someone's job on the line if this doesn't work because they've made such a big spend commitment with us? Okay, I know that this is really meaningful and I need to make sure that I've got people involved on this. Is this something where there's no stakes at all on their end? This is very low stakes, in which case you're probably going to get very low buy-in on their end, right? Those are some of the kinds of things that you want to uncover.
So we've talked a little bit about like what people are getting wrong when it comes to these mutual success plans. Let's flip it to the more optimistic side of the conversation. What are people getting right, and what secrets should we as the listeners be stealing for our own companies, our own plans?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say when it comes to what people are getting right, I would say there's a few things that have really, really stood out to me. Um, Number one, like the ones that have done it well really don't rush past that research and discovery phase. They really lean in to understanding deeply the customer as much as possible, whether that's through their own research or through discovery with the customer before jumping to a success plan. And I think that they understand what goes into the customer's success at a really deep level before trying to create a document to share. And that can't be overstated for some of the reasons we already talked about. And I've seen a few people that I know that do that really well, and they spend a lot of effort on that, and they've really honed their craft at that piece. Second part that I would say has made them really successful, and I think it's an often overlooked skill in the CSM space is being a project manager, like thinking through how would you project manage what you've now discovered? How would you set up milestones? How would you set up what actually this looks like in terms of how you get to where you want to go? It's not enough to have a destination. You need to understand how do you get there, and thinking like a project manager doesn't do all the steps in a project. The best project managers know how to, I jokingly say this as somebody who's very fond of the project managers I've worked with, know how to antagonize just enough internally to agitate, maybe is a better word, agitate just enough to keep things moving, right? They
Right.
don't let something sit, they keep accountability going. So as a CSM, being able to think like that in terms of what the steps look like to get there, as well as how to like effectively execute and follow through, because a success plan has to have follow through, because I would say it'd be the final piece. If it is something you create and then revisit a quarter later or 6 weeks later or whatever cadence later, that is not beneficial. Like, you want this to be something that you're actually executing on and taking actions on. So that's the final piece, would be that it's realistic and actionable. And if it's pie in the sky, things that neither side is gonna take or be likely to take, then you've already set yourself up for failure on that.
I like the idea too of your success managers taking what we learn from project management too. I've worked with a lot of people who are well-intentioned, but they tend to be very passive and are putting themselves in reactive mode of like, well, the customer doesn't need me, so I guess I'm not going to bother them. And I've got other priorities, or hey, you know what? I just kind of want to hang out on the beach for a little bit, and that's totally fine. And I'll put out the fire when the fire comes. So I like the idea of like really being proactive and having that connection and taking an active role not only in your customer success but in your success as well.
A Absolutely, and some of my favorite CSMs I've worked with, both in my current org and others, are really good at that, and they're really direct about that with a customer. They have customers that love working with them, but not because they're the, like, stereotypical, like, nice CSM, though they are. They're very kind people. That's not a reflection on it. They're very kind people, but their customers love them because they hold them accountable. They follow up with them and ask directly, "Hey, we said that this needed to happen. This didn't. What's the reason here? Was this not actually a priority for you, and we need to change what the action is? Do you not have what you need? Is there a bandwidth constraint? What are we doing on this piece? Because I know that you've told me you want to get to Y outcome, and you need to take X action to get there, and I haven't seen X, and I don't want you to miss out on Y. What's
Yeah.
what's the gap here?"
Well,
And the
and tying it
ability
back
to do
to
that.
why, right?
Exactly, exactly, and that's what's been really, so I get really passionate about that, because I get really excited because the execution piece and that accountability is so crucial to the success of these.
Yeah, and it's not like babysitting your clients, right? We're not like trying to babysit our customers. However, if
No,
you've set up a mutual success plan and like lived up to every word of that statement, mutual success, meaning you both find that outcome. So your X leads to their Y, but you have to do X together in order to get there. And I think that's the part that a lot of people miss is they understand the why of why we're trying to get where we're going and they understand the process to get there, but they have a hard time articulating how those two interchange with each other and have a hard time speaking up when something is going to put the project off the rails, especially if it's like on your customer. Like they didn't do something like, that's hard. It's hard to call out accountability on your own teammates, let alone be like, "Hey, customer, you aren't living up to your end of the deal." Like, that's a hard conversation to have.
and I think that framing it, and part of why that's hard is when you, because of that framing that you just used, "You're not living up to your end of the deal." If that's the framing we come with, that's always going to be a hard conversation. But if
Yeah,
we come with the framing of, "I really want you to get this benefit that you want. And we've agreed that to get there, you have to do this other thing. I'm not coming at you because I care about you holding up your end of some generic deal. I'm
right.
coming because I'm really committed to you getting this outcome that you've told me is really important." And whether it's through mutual agreement or my experience working with other customers or fill in the blank, we know that to get to this outcome, you have to do this other thing. How can I help you get to doing that thing that hasn't happened yet? Right?
Well,
And so
and
framing it that way.
accountability, not accusatory, right?
Exactly, and that's why framing it that way of like, "Ooh, we haven't seen this, and I really want this other outcome for you. How do we help this happen here? Because I know that if this action doesn't happen, this outcome will not be achieved. And like
So
framing it that way. Yeah.
so a couple of the things that I'm seeing when I talk to CSMs or even senior CSMs, their account plans are out of control. Their mutual success plans are out of control, not by their own choice, but because such and such VP or so and so C-suite over there has decided that they want this information for their regular one-on-ones for their internal stuff. So how do you if I'm a CSM and I'm dealing with a leader, right, inside my own company, how do I manage up or manage out to make sure that I'm getting what my boss needs while keeping this accountability, not accusatory approach?
Yeah, so there's a couple different components. Like number one, knowing when and how to flag risks on those is just crucial because your chances are one of the biggest things your leaders care about is no surprises. Like leaders know. Speaking as a leader, we know that there will be risk, that there will be things that come up. I understand that and expect that. What I do not appreciate, and the teams all know this, is surprises, right? Is when we can forecast, even when there's like a big churn that we know is coming, right? That being a surprise is the bigger issue. So number one, knowing that your leaders probably care most about surprise. So over communicate because most leaders actually want over communication, and over communicate doesn't mean necessarily in quantity of info, but maybe frequency and channel that's aligned to what the leader prefers. So
Yeah.
that could again be a whole separate conversation about how to manage up, which would be understanding how a leader prefers to be communicated with, and what motivates them. I used to have a whole matrix that I used for people that I worked with cross-functionally and vertically, that I put together to understand what were their motivators, what were their preferred communication channels so that I could kind of go and reference. It was again very unattractive because it's a spreadsheet, but so I could go and say if I'm working with this person, who would I go and bring customer anecdotes to versus who would I go to and bring the ARR data backed case?
Yeah.
And who would I send a WhatsApp message to versus a formatted email versus a Zoom chat? All of those kind of ways to understand. So that's another table stakes piece. But the other part would be having strategic asks of your leaders because most good leaders, which I know I'm already
It's
probably
like
getting in hot water by
quantifying.
saying that, yeah, would be they want to be involved, but not just in a help I'm stuck way. There's a difference between we are running into this roadblock with this customer. I think you engaging with this persona here would unstuck this. Leader, can you help with that? Your
Mhm.
title, even though you're be saying the same thing as me, you coming in as a VP to their VP would make a difference in a way that me talking to my champion just won't. Can you do that? That's a specific ask that I've never met a VP that isn't thrilled to help
Well,
action on that, right? Because that's still the CSM taking ownership. The CSM hasn't abdicated ownership when they're doing that. In fact, they've been very concrete and they can even go the step further of using ChatGPT or whatever AI is at their fingertips to even draft the email for their VP to send, right? You can go
right.
really far with that to make that a really low lift. Um, because that's the second thing is no surprises and ownership. Is leadership wants to see CSMs taking ownership. And so in that whole process, you can ask for help and ask for leadership involvement without abdicating ownership. Like it's totally possible to do that.
So, we've kind of talked about the idea that mutual success needs to be mutual, and that seems so obvious when you say it, right? That's how you know it's right when the light bulb goes off and you're like, "Hey, yes, that's correct." We've talked about some of the things that are the bad behaviors that are going into these mutual success plans. We talked about what good behaviors looks like. Who do you think is leading the charge? Who is changing the way we build relationships with customers?
Yeah, I would say someone who is really great at that would be if you haven't already spoken with her or any of your listeners haven't already followed her, but Erica Villarreal is someone who I think does a really fantastic job at that. She is a strategic principal CSM at a company called Aptura, and she's someone who does a really good job at building that kind of relationship with our customers that leads to these kind of success plans. So she would be the first one I would recommend. And probably the biggest voice I would say on that front when it comes to this piece in particular, the relationship building and how to do that in a really strategic way. Um, I would also say the other one who I think is really helpful for this would be Jeff Kushmerek of Infinite Renewals, because I think he does a really good job at cutting through the fluff. You'll find very little BS on what he talks about and how he shares with building those relationships, which is I think my favorite aspect of Jeff is it's all actionable and focuses on like how do you actually do this as a practitioner.
I had Jeff on a round table a couple of months or a couple of weeks ago, and he was, hot to trot on throwing taking off the gloves and throwing down on some hot takes, so we love that about Jeff.
He's the best. He is one of the best. Love that there. And I say that as somebody who's been on the receiving end of some of his hot takes sometimes, and that's okay. I appreciate it because if nothing else, I leave feeling very, very challenged because I know he comes from a place of experience
Yeah.
and actionability. And then I'd be remiss without giving necessarily any of the specific names, but I think a lot of the CSMs on the teams that I lead right now, I've been really impressed with the way that they have leaned into leveling up what relationship building looks like and how to influence customers. So big shout out to the current TSM team I have the privilege of leading right now. They're doing a great job at leaning in with that.
Awesome. We love a leader that shouts out their own team. That's definitely, we love that.
They're great.
So
They're
Dan, if
great.
someone is really connecting with you, if they want to learn more, where can they find you online?
Yeah, the best place to find me would just be on LinkedIn. I don't have something separate at the moment yet. Maybe one day, but if you want to stay apprised on whatever that one day would look like, follow me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And thank you so much for joining me on the Growth Signal.
Thank you, Alyssa. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.